Hello and welcome. My name's Doug Fink, and I'm going to be your host. I'm going to walk through how to call functions with chat models, a new feature that OpenAI released a bit ago. And I'm going to show you how I built, not how I built it into PowerShell, but I'm going to show you some of the function calls you can use to make that happen. So those who are new here, if you don't know me, my name's Doug Fink. I'm a PowerShell MVP for Microsoft, have been for 15 years. And I'm really looking forward to playing around with this today with you. All right, let's get going. Okay, so how to call functions with chat models. So you have GPT and they have different models. You can use GPT-3, 3.5, 4.0, and they all have different characteristics. They're all tuned for different things, not to be confused with fine-tuning. So what's function calling? Function calling is a new way to more reliably connect GPT's capabilities with external tools and APIs. So what if you're working with GPT, maybe you've heard some of the positive, negative hype about all this stuff with ChatGPT, and sometimes you can actually say, hey, how can I work with this kind of whether it's your external API for your internally to your company or some external API that you're going to work with some tools. And GPT sometimes will come back and give you an answer, say, hey, make this function call with these parameters, and it will do something called it'll hallucinate. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, that's horrible. Different discussion. I don't think it's super horrible. You need to understand how this is a tool and not a silver bullet. So they introduced something called function calling, and to help reduce that and give you a different way of working with it. It took me a while to get my head around, but this is where I am at this point. Some of the benefits using function calling is modular code, right? Enhances code organization, gives you new capabilities. It expands AI's functionality range. We might see some of that here. I'll show you. Hopefully it's compelling. There's performance optimizations because specialized functions boost efficiency rather than letting GPT figure out, we'll call this, this, and this. You can do some interesting things. We won't see that today. It enables dynamic real-time dialogues. It maintains clean, manageable AI code because you're really separating the problem into how you prompt and what the prompt can do for GPT, and GPT can then further instruct next parts of your system. Isolates and addresses issues effectively. We won't see that, but I'm seeing that in playing with this more. And facilitates updates without system disruption. So this is a polyglot interactive notebook. I've got some explanations here in Markdown. And if you want to go grab this is the URL. You can see it down in the description below. You can grab it, and if you get all the pieces set up correctly, in VS Code, etc., then you can actually play along and see how this works. If you don't have an API key, you can go to this URL and you can sign up, get the API key, and you're off to the races. Lastly, you need to get PowerShellAI, and if you run this cell, so once you get the key and you drop your key in here, you can run this and you can execute the cell, and it will set your OpenAI key in the notebook environment. I already have mine set. Then you can come up here and you can click run. It'll check to see if the module exists. If it does not, it'll install it. Obviously on my system it's installed. So what are we going to do today? I wrote a function called getCurrentWeather, and it basically works off of this repo. What it does, it's kind of cool. It gets the weather. You can pass in a whole bunch of different parameters to a REST API, and you can get weather like this. You can get details and visuals, and many other pieces. I'm just going to do it to basically get temperature readings, etc. Nothing, no visuals. So that's what we're working around. So I wrote a function called getCurrentWeather. You can pass in a location, and you can pass in for the unit, Celsius or Fahrenheit. If when you pass that in, I will check and see if you passed in Fahrenheit, and you need to pass either an M or a U to the URL, to the REST endpoint, to get back either one of those formats. So once that's done, I write to the host saying, well, what location did you pass in? And so I can say, hey, I'm getting the weather for New York City in Celsius or Fahrenheit, and that's how you call the REST endpoint using the invoke REST method. So I'm going to run this up. Okay, so you can see down here there's a little timer how long it takes to run, and a little check mark if it runs correctly. So we're good to go in terms of that function. Now, moving on. So OpenAI came up with something called a function spec. So what I did was I wrote a function called convert from function definition. So you can do a get command, get current weather, right? And I'll pass that function command into the convert from function definition, and it comes back as an object, and I'm going to convert that to JSON. And this is what it comes back with, right? So this is you can craft this by hand if you want. In other languages, I haven't seen yet if they've done this in Python or any of the other languages like C#, PHP, etc., that actually take the metadata of functions and then convert it for you into the JSON format that OpenAI expects. But I wrote that way. That way I can more quickly iterate over the functions I build, and I want to experiment with the OpenAI and GPT prompts. And if I'm tweaking my function, I don't want to have to come back here and figure out, well, what was that JSON property that I need? But in essence, what it does is it takes the function name. You can name it here. You can give it a description. It pulled that out of this function description, which I've added a capability for, and parameter descriptions for the name of the parameter and what it defines. Now, what's really cool is, we won't go into too much depth, but these descriptions that get laid out in here actually become part of your prompt to GPT, which gets really interesting. And I'll have videos up on that about those pieces and how you can really benefit from using those. So I described the function, I grabbed that description, I could have left it blank, and then the parameters, you set up an object of parameters, and the default is type is object. They're going to expand that going forward. You start naming the property, so I grab the location, I know it's a type string, right, because I defined it here. This is PowerShell, how you define a type of string, a data type for a parameter. And so it's type string, and I grab that description, unit, gives the description, and the fact that it has a validate set, I translate a validate set into an enum, which is expected by OpenAI, right? So I drop that in there, and then I just automatically just put all those parameters as being required, which indicates to the ChatGPT model that, okay, I need to have data for each one of these. There's ways that you can then further tweak that. Now, since I can do this programmatically, we'll see how that works. But again, you can craft this all by hand, and you can keep them in separate files. I typically use the convert from function. I might go across a bunch of different PS1 files, grab all the functions out of it with the parameters, and then I just have one giant JSON piece that I can pass up to ChatGPT that describes all the functions for my module or whatever system I'm working with in PowerShell. And again, notice there's nothing here that's specific about PowerShell, right? I could be defining this interface definition language, as I like to call it. This can actually then, as I'm doing my prompts, it could be pointing to C#, F#, it can point to PHP, JavaScript, whatever language, and you can indicate that in the prompts that you give. So this just describes a function. Again, these functions could exist, or how you call things, they could exist for any language, any type system. Your imagination will let you dictate what you want to do. So let's see what we can do. So the first thing I want to do is, what is the weather like today in Greenland? And here's how you can set up. You need to talk to it in terms of messages to ChatGPT using 3.5 the new version, the turbo version with the 16K context. So when I run this, okay, I have a function called new chat message template, and it takes the Q, $Q, which is the question I want to ask, and I'm just printing it out, and you can see here's an object. It's a user with that message. Nothing exciting there. Now, what I can do, okay, if we remember previously, I created dollar functions, right? I grabbed the current weather, which I defined up further, and I ran, and now it's part of the run space in PowerShell. So I can get the command, get current weather, and I converted that function definition, right? So it's in the variable functions. And then down here in this cell, I'm going to take the message I just created, what's the weather like, and I'm going to pass that plus the functions into get ChatGPT completion or get chat completion. Now what that does is that's what it starts to interact with. That passes everything up to the model, and you can see, and this is what comes back. This is what comes back from the model. Okay, it tells me a bunch of stuff. It tells me the model I use, 3.5 Turbo 16K, and what version I'm using. It tells me the choices, which is what we really want to get at. Notice in here we see an index, a message. We'll see what the message is in a bit. I think I'd show that. And then it shows the finish reason. Here it's saying, oh, it's a function call, which is cool because there's a bunch of different finish reasons. For example, one is function call and one is stop. So if it's a function call, and if I interrogate that in the code, I go, okay, I got to do a function call. If it says stop, I can just print out the message and stop whatever I'm doing. Okay, so let's take a look at just the choices, right? And I'm going to convert that to JSON for easy readability. And here I'm just talking about how inspecting the finish reason, what I just described. This is it here, you can read about it. And this is what that response from ChatGPT is. This is what it looks like, right? So it comes back and says role as assistant, which means it came from GPT. The content is null. And the finish reason is a function call, and notice what it puts in the function call, right? It puts the name, so I figured out, oh, you're asking about Greenland, so that's a function call. Yup, I saw a function called get current weather, and then it lays out the arguments that should be passed into that function. It wants to pass in an argument of location with the value Greenland, and the parameter unit with a value of Celsius. Looks pretty cool, right? So and what did I say over here? We'll come back up to the question. What is the weather like today in Greenland? So it knows what the location is, and it defaulted to Celsius. Now, the integration of the chat models with the PowerShell function, right? So now what I'm going to do is we're going to take that chat response choices array. I'm going to take the first one, and I'm going to just pass that over to $target. And then I'm going to say, well, what's the finish reason? And I'm saying if the finish reason is a function call, I'm going to grab the name of the function, and then I'm going to grab the arguments, right? So if we take a look up here, right? Here's the name, and then here's the arguments, right? And those are in JSON. You can see that this is an object with a key value pairs for the parameters and their values. So I'm going to grab the name from function call, and then in the function call I'm going to grab the arguments, and then I'm going to do a little trick here in PowerShell. I can then take those arguments, right, and I know they're in a JSON format, and I'm going to convert those arguments from JSON as a hash table, because then I can splat that hash table. So now I do this little funky thing. I'm going to use ampersand, which is the call operator. The name of the function is get current weather, and then those parameters, location and unit with the values, I'm going to splat. So let's see what we get. So it gets the weather for Greenland and Celsius, and there's the function call to the REST API, and it's working. So notice it's telling me it's in Celsius, it's telling me it's Greenland. I'm getting the wind, I think that's the wind, is down 17 kilometers per hour. And that's pretty much it. Now, let's do a little bit more, and then we'll wrap up. I'm going to go back here, and I can put all of this into a single function, right? So I'm just showing you how the PowerShell stuff breaks down. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. I'm going to say, what is the weather like today in NYC, for New York City, right? So we'll get the message. We'll just take a look at that. Okay, there we go. And come back up and grab. Just going to grab here. We'll take that new message. Pass in that new message with the functions. Okay, so that's the message, and then what we're going to do is this last piece, and see. I'm going to grab that target, and I'm going to go let this do another round trip to the get ChatGPT completion. We'll set up the message with what's the weather like today in New York City. Set that up in the message array. Comment that out. Don't need to see it. We'll interact with GPT. If we get a function call back, we'll do the magic of pulling out the name, the arguments, and then splatting that. Let's see what happens. Hopefully this real time will work. Getting the weather for New York, and sure enough, there you have it. We'll do one more. Of course, in New York City, I'm just going to spell Fahrenheit. I'm not even going to spell the whole thing. Let's see if GPT can figure it out. Yep, sure enough, it figured out the word Fahrenheit, and there it is, 75 degrees today in Fahrenheit. And I think that's the wind out of the southwest. 4 miles per hour. So that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks for joining. If you liked what you see, please subscribe, hit the notification. Then you'll see when I do more videos on this, as well as many other topics I cover. Have a good one.